Okay, so we are in Western Japan, in the Kyushu Island, and we have 7 prefectures in Kyushu Island. And I'm from Saga University, of course, in Saga. And Saga is known for, the seaweed culturing. You can see many poles there. The pole can hang the seaweed net, and you can see the black stuff, which is the raw materials of sushi papers. And sushi sushi paper industry is quite big in Saga, 0.3 billion AUD. So it is quite important to understand the how seaweed can grow out in the field. But the diatom also microalgae takes up all nutrients away from the seawater. So I'm monitoring photosynthesis, both diatoms and seaweed in our fields. Ariake Sound. Yeah. So this is my current work, totally far from polar work. So today I would like to introduce my PhD and postdoc work in Hokkaido University and University of Tasmania. So raw iron effects on photosynthesis of ice algae during ice formation and ice melt using the ice tank technique. As you know, sea ice algae is microalgae inhabiting sea ice, mainly at the bottom. And the light environment at the bottom of sea ice is quite limited. So they are shade acclimated, but they cannot move with lateral transport or vertical mixing. They are in a fixed place, so they can acclimate the fixed light environment. So they can be a significant primary producer during ice seasons. Also important food source for zooplankton or fish in sea ice zones. This is the photo taken from the bottom size. You can see brown color, mainly color of diatoms, and you can see some strings. So this is assemblage of ice algae, quite intense, so they can be a string-like community. So it is quite important to understand the primary production or biomass of ice algae for sea ice ecosystems. But iron starvation in Antarctic pack ice reported by Pankowski and Macpin, 2008, because the sea ice algae during the pack ice season, they can access to HNLC water in the Southern Ocean. So the iron is a limiting nutrients in Antarctic pack ice. Iron is quite important element for photosynthesis, which controls 30 to 40% of primary production in the ocean, mainly in HNLC zones. And of course, iron is quite important for photosynthetic apparatus or pigment synthesis. This is a schematic of photosynthesis from light absorption by pigment, and the light energy can be converted to chemical energy just as a electron transport via photosystem to cytochrome and reboosted at photosystem 1 and finally arrives at ferredoxin. And then the reductant NADPH and ATPase produces ADP. And these compounds will be used in carbon fixation by Rubisco and resultant ADP and NADPH produces a final product, carbohydrate, or this is a carbon fixation cycle. So, and particularly the photosystems and cytochrome and ferredoxin, the important element of photosynthesis, requires a lot of iron, as you say. So it is quite important to understand the effect of iron on photosynthesis. But you all know that pelagic regions, HNLC, iron is quite limited in any seasons, relatively stably low iron concentration, and there's no iron source in pelagic region. So they adapted low iron requirement by, how can I say, changing the community structures to small size picoplankton and nanoplankton. On the other hand, ice algae sometimes have access to iron source, particularly before ice formation. So they are dominated by large diatoms, which requires a lot of iron atoms. And environment is quite dynamic with ice formation and ice melt. So very large fluctuations in temperature, salinity, light availabilities are significant in sea ice environment. Particularly light environment is almost close to zero at the bottom of sea ice, but really highlight exposure when they are melted out from sea ice. So ice algae are always faced to multiple co-stressors. So ice algae need to adjust their photosynthesis ability to co-stressors, but as we said, as we discussed, the raw iron environment, how can I say, reduces the flexibility of photosynthesis. We suppose. So as Pankowski and Macmin suggest, the raw iron availability was evident in Antarctic pack ice, but not sure what happens after, during or after the low soil, so low iron availability for photosynthesis or primary production of ice algae. However, the sea ice work is quite difficult. In short, open ocean method cannot be applied. For example, in situ measurement, we cannot deploy CTD against the sea ice. And satellite cannot be used. You can see just white surface. So we cannot understand the distribution or distribution of biomass, of course, photosynthesis. These limitations hinder development of ecological models because we cannot know the drivers of biomass or photosynthesis. So to overcome these difficulties, we developed the ice tank. Ice tank is sometimes used for ice physics or ice chemistry measurements, but for my knowledge, just a few ice tank working on biological measurements. So, but our ice tank can replicate in situ pack ice environment in the lab and successfully incubate ice algae for an extended period, how long you want. Briefly, the ice tank is just 17 liters container. So we can prepare the 70 liters of artificial seawater into our ice tank, and we can place the ice tank to the minus 30 degrees freezer. If so, the seawater will freeze at the bottom, and it is not preferable for ice algal incubation, ice algae incubation. So the temperature probe in the ice water interface and heater and circulator communicate each other to maintain the ice thickness stable, so we can incubate the ice algae at the bottom of at the bottom or in the sea ice, in artificial sea ice. So with the ice tank, I would like to answer how multiple co-stressors influence the photophysiology of ice algae, such as during the freezing stress, and during the frozen period with low light and chronic iron starvations, and melting event when they discharge from sea ice. Discharge from sea ice. And also, as I said, the low iron concentration reduces the photosynthesis flexibility, so they may be weak to highlight stress after the chronic iron starvation. So, ice tank technique can reveal the undescribed photosynthetic response of ice algae, such as chronic iron starvation, reduces flexibility of ice algae photosynthesis, and they become weak to highlight stress when they are melted out from sea ice. So to investigate the effect of iron on photosynthesis of ice algae, we incubated the model diatom, Flagellopus cylindrus, isolated from the KC station. And we incubated this species with aqueous media buffered with EDTA to control the iron concentration. Iron prime is the inorganic iron species, which is highly bioavailable. And 4.6 picomolar is quite low for photosynthesis inferred from Pankowski and Macmin, 2009. And also iron is tightly interact with light availability. So I set up 2 light intensity, normal sea ice environment light intensity, and more high light intensity mimic the future ice thinning environment. And the ice tank cycles is like this. So first we collect the seawater before freezing as an initial sample, and then the freezing cycle started. The ice tank. In the ice tank, we can see artificial sea ice. And with a trace metal koala, we can get some cores like this every 5 days for 20 days. After that, I melted sea ice and replaced with milky water partly to mimic the ice melt event. And after that, to mimic the discharge of ice algae to the open ocean, I expose really intense light for 2 hours to melted samples. So I measured photosynthetic measurements as a photosynthetic activity and safety valve of photosystem 2 with FRF. Variable chlorophyll fluorescence, FEOFM, is just photosynthetic activity, straightforward. The other thing, non-photochemical quenching, NPQ, the too much light is harmful. So NPQ is NPQ induction slow excess energy as heat. So that heat energy slow away is NPQ. So it is a safety valve. So photosynthetic activity and activity of safety valve we measured. And also I measure the gene expression of carbon fixation because photosynthesis, FRRF can measure the photosystem too, the beginning of photosynthesis. So I measure the gene expression of carbon fixation as a final step of photosynthesis. So this is the result of photosynthetic activity, high iron treatment, low iron treatment, high light treatment, low light treatment. And water samples before freezing, the initial samples, and melted samples and light exposed samples are indicated in a shaded bar, and closed bar indicates the ice samples during the frozen period. And the initial photosynthetic activity, of course, significantly lower in low iron treatment compared to high iron treatment, because as I showed, photosynthetic apparatus requires iron. And during the freezing event, interestingly, almost all treatment decrease the photosynthetic activity. But on the other hand, the gene expression of carbon fixation, RBCL, significantly increased in all treatment. The reason why the upregulation of Rubisco gene would be the compensation strategy of carbon fixation. The temperature in sea ice is quite low, so the enzyme activity of Rubisco also quite low. But they need to maintain the carbon fixation even in sea ice low temperature. So they try to increase the amount of Rubisco to compensate the activity as a whole. So that's why the gene expression RBCL upregulated, I guess. On the other hand, the FeO by FM, the photosynthetic activity during the frozen period, regardless of iron or light availability, the photosynthetic activity are comparable. Previous review said sea ice is a stable platform for ice algae. So even the light or iron is limited, sea ice is still a good platform for ice algae production. After melted out from melting event and light exposure event, of course, photosynthetic activity decreased significantly due to, because too much light is harmful, as I said. So the photo inhibition is evident for all treatment, but I would like to know, this is reversible photoinhibition or irreversible photoinhibition. Like if you saw an car accident, sometimes you're injured, but you can repair after some hospitalization, but sometimes not. It is not a good example, but yeah, so reversible or irreversible. So I look at the safety valve NPQ. So high iron treatments, after light exposure, they increase the safety valve activity almost double, but not the case for low iron treatment. Somewhat, some increase, but not so much than high iron treatment. So it means high iron treatment, ice algae or diatoms are highly light flexible. So after light, the high photoinhibition, they can protect themselves to increase the safety valve activity. But after the chronic iron starvation, they cannot induct the self photoprotection like an NPQ safety valve. So low iron concentration suppressed the NPQ availability and became weak to light stress. So as a conclusion, we measure the photosynthesis activity of ice algae with ice tank, and freezing stress suppress the photosynthesis, but they compensate the carbon fixation by upregulating rubisco-protein. And on the other hand, ice algae, interestingly, optimize their photosynthesis during frozen period, regardless light or iron concentration. And of course, the highlight exposure after melted out inhibits photosynthesis, but the response to highlight exposure is totally different in high iron treatment or after the chronic iron starvation. So sea ice reduction simply takes away the platform for ice algae production. So ice thinning, ice reduction decrease the total ice algae production, and ice algae might less contribute to the ice edge blooms after the iron starvation in the sea ice, which may change the diversity of biomass of ice-associated biota. So today's topics are published in these articles. So if you have interest, please read my papers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kazu, for the great talk. Any questions? I'm a physical background, so yeah, it's a bit hard to.
Yeah.
So now the ongoing sea ice reduction can reduce the ice algae production, which means many implicating some carbon fixation situation.
Sorry?
Is it
carbon sequestration?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I guess so. Yeah. I didn't expect that the photosynthesis activity during the frozen season, frozen period, is comparable, regardless of light or iron treatment. It means ice algae can, how can I say, maintain in a low, even low photosynthesis rate, but they can, how can I say, grow slowly for a long period, longer period. So it means, so from this result, the for example, 1 square meter production platform shrink just in 0.5 indicates just these just just a reduction of platform. So it simply reduces the production from my result.
Yes, thank you. Chris, may I have a question?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the talk. Again, this is an ignorant question. I shouldn't say again, your question wasn't ignorant, Kaihei. So what are the projections for iron availability in Antarctic waters? I would guess that there's going to be more iron as you get deglaciation.
It is, yeah, great questions. We are not sure. There are some contradicting results. The model study by Phil Boyd said the iron concentration, iron availability for iron availability in the Southern Ocean will a bit increase, but on the other side, I forgot the Italian researcher and maybe the PhD student in UTAS or IMAS said the reduction rate of iron species to reduction, like more bioavailable iron species will be decreased after ocean acidification. So there are some working on both the total iron and iron species discussion. It is still not contradicting, but yeah, it is still difficult to project the iron availability in the Southern Ocean or bioavailability of Southern Ocean.
Any other questions? Then thank you so much, Kazu-san, for this talk.
Thank you. ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。So next speaker is the Chris Aiken from IMAS UTAS.
Great. Thank you very much, Kaihei, for the invitation. Now it's going to probably take me 20 minutes just to work out how to share my screen. Just typical. Beginning. Screen. Can you see?
Yes, and the screen.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Thank you.
And in order to get a little, I normally point with my finger because I'm old. How do I get that little red dot? Is that these? Not that. Oh, doesn't matter.
I can see the point as well.
Yeah. Well, no, I actually don't know how to put the pointer on, to tell the truth.
If you right click in the middle of your presentation, you should be able to
right click. Yeah.
You should be able to see an option there, laser pointer.
Pointer options. Thank you. Perfect. Great. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. So let's get into it. So what we're seeing here, so I kind of always show this movie, and it's always a temptation just to only show this one because people tend to like it. I think it's very soothing to watch it right up until the point you try and work out what's going on, and then it'll drive you insane. So basically what we've got here, this is Africa. So at the bottom of Africa, the shading is bathymetry. So that's basically bits of bathymetry that are higher than 3,000 meters. The dark line is the average position of what I'm calling the Agulhas extensions. This is the Agulhas western boundary current coming down. It does this turn towards the east. So its average position is the dark grey curve, and then the light grey curve is its day-to-day position. And so really the take-home point here is to see that they're similar, but they're very different. So the black curve, which is the mean position, it actually never happens. It's not a real state of the system. You'll never ever see that grey curve sitting on top of the light grey curve will never sit exactly on top of the dark grey curve, which was an important realization for the work. There's also other things to note here. So what's happening here, the fact that the current basically is going up and down. It's producing these eddies. You'll notice that the eddies propagate west and quite often get reabsorbed, which I'll refer to later on. So western boundary current extensions. So Agulhas extension, this term Agulhas extension, no one uses it. They'll refer to the Agulhas return current or something else. So I'm kind of pushing it, trying to get it to catch on, but I know that it won't. But the reason being that there's a lot of extensions, right? So we know that in all of the basins, just for the non-physical oceanographers, all of the basins, it's very well known that there's this very big difference between the western and the eastern sides of the basin. On the eastern sides, like here, the California current, it's weak and it's slow, and it goes towards the equator. And then on the other side, you have these very fast flowing currents going towards the poles. And so all of the basins have this. The ones on the western side of the basin called western boundary currents. They're all very well known. But there's also an asymmetry between the poles between the equator and the pole, as you see. So all of our western boundary currents, they all tend to get to a certain latitude and then they'll shoot off towards the east. And so there's the Kuroshio, the Gulf Stream does it here. The EAC is a bit piddly. It still does it. It's a bit of a weird one, but the Brazil current and then the Agulhas. So because they all have this common, there's this common aspect. It's a common type of current that occurs in the world oceans. These what we call zonal jets, meandering zonal jets that shoot off towards the east at the bottom of the western boundary current. So I call them all western boundary currents, extensions, and one of the Agulhas is the Agulhas extension. That was all I wanted to say here. So what we're plotting here, so sorry, I don't know if I said that last one. So the color dark green that's it's plotting the speed of the velocity of the ocean, right? So dark green means fast currents, light green means slow currents. And now I'm showing that the height of the ocean with a very weird color bar. So basically I've just overexposed and underexposed for reasons that I'll explain, but for the non-physical oceanographers, the flow in the ocean, it's mostly geostrophic, which means it tends to follow contours of sea surface height. It doesn't go straight down from high to low, it'll follow contours. And so here, red is high ocean, blue is low ocean. And so you can see the flow, for example, here looking at the Agulhas, flows down the coast and follows these contours here. And the reason that I've done this overexposure and underexposure is just so you can see basically where the flow of the Agulhas is going. So the Agulhas is the bit that's neither dark red nor dark blue. So it's this strip here, which most of it turns around, heads east, and then you can see that there's a large chunk of it, if you follow that contour, heads back into the Indian, but there's also a significant fraction that goes underneath goes underneath Australia and basically becomes the subtropical front. Right, and so if we think about the mass balance in the Indian, so how much water is going in and how much water is going out. So we know there's a lot of water coming out in the Agulhas. There's water going in that's basically driven by the wind, but we also have the Indonesian through flow. And as a result, the amount of water that's coming out through the Agulhas is more than the amount of water that's going in due to the wind in this bit, just because you've got the Indonesian through flow. So in a sense, this flow that we've got south of Australia is basically the same volume as what's coming in through the Indonesian through flow. There's bibs and bobs. Obviously, you've got something that's well known here is called the Agulhas leakage, which tends to form eddies here, which will go off into the Atlantic, which are very important, have a important climate significance. But in terms of volume, it's not that much volume. So most of that Indonesian through flow volume equates to our flow south of Australia into the SDF. And so the points here is there's from the Indian, there's actually most of the flux into the subtropical front is from the Indian and also from the Pacific in reality. So you can see that if you add something to the Pacific, it goes through the EAC, Australia's western boundary current, doesn't get too far south. So it's kind of a more direct pathway to the Southern Ocean is through the Indian. And arguably, I said this the other day, just to be provocative, that the western boundary current of the Pacific is probably the Agulhas more than the EAC. This is also a zone of what's called a high eddy kinetic energy, even though I won't get into that, but you actually don't get that many eddies, but it's called eddy kinetic energy, which is usually associated with a large cross-front transport. And so on the one hand, we've got this large advective transport of stuff going south of Australia towards the Southern Ocean. But then just from geostrophy alone, it'll never cross that. It'll never cross that boundary. And so, but when you have eddies and such and non-geostrophic processes, that's what you need in order to transport heat, for example, across towards the south. But the fact that you also get this meridional flow, and so you can see here there's the currents going up and down. That also means if you blow a westerly wind across it, it will tend to, given that it's warm on the north side, it's cold on the south side. So you can actually get the atmosphere transporting heat from one side to the other, just picking up heat on one side, dropping it off on the other. And also the fact, so there's this characteristic thing about ACC, it's got a very dramatic slope, southward slope, and one of our PhD students, Felipe, gave an interesting talk about the possible consequences of that. And I'll quickly go through this picture of the tree. It's been very windy here in Hobart these last few days. So if you imagine we've got a tree, I'll explain why we're looking at a tree in a little bit. Look at a tree, you can see it's leaning over. So what does that, we can probably guess what the wind's doing. Let's just pretend it's doing something like that. So the wind comes along, realizes there's a tree there, goes up and over, right? That's what you would expect. You would probably, if I asked you to draw a vertical streamline, that's one you would draw. But if you look at if we pretend that tree now is South America and you turn it upside down, the ACC kind of goes the wrong way. It kind of looks like it knows South America's coming up, so it starts to go south and then bobs up at the end. So why does it do that? I mean, it's because of westward propagation, right? It's because information of this boundary propagates backwards. As a result, the ACC has this pronounced southward trajectory in what otherwise it's mostly a zonal jet, and so that has consequences for poleward heat fluxes, but also in this part of the world that's my interest, it also means that when you produce an eddy, if it goes on the north side, you can imagine if this is our axis here, an eddy that's formed on the north side, it'll tend to propagate westward and get reabsorbed by the ACC. So it actually reduces the amount of mixing that you get due to eddies. See how we go for time. Probably won't get there. anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So most of my work has been to do with understanding the trends in this part of the world. So the big picture here with the pinkish background, that's the trend over the last 30 years in sea surface height. The last 30 years because that's our altimetry record. So we have basically 30 years of satellite measurements of the height of the ocean. And most of it is pink because we have the sea level rise signal, which is that one there. It's like 3 centimeters a decade. But we've got some parts of the ocean where we have these much bigger trends in sea surface height. And so the main one here is the Kuroshio. It's got this massive, this is up to 30 centimeters a decade changes in the height of the ocean. And the one that's coming second is our Agulhas Extension region. And if you look at the two, there's quite a difference. In the case of the Kuroshio extension, it's kind of like a long zonal band, whereas in the Agulhas extension, it's kind of red blue dots in the zonal direction. So the fact that we've got these big patterns in these two places, it's mostly because our western boundary current extensions are places where you have very strong gradients in sea surface height. So if that's basically your strong jet, your strong current coincides with a strong gradient in sea surface height. So if that current moves a little bit, it ends up being manifested as a large change in sea surface height. So in the case of the Kuroshio extension here, you can see that this is kind of consistent with a meridional movement of that main axis. Which I think there's some papers that kind of suggested that would happen. In the case of the Agulhas, it's despite the fact that we might expect that the ocean patterns are just going to shift polewards because that's the big picture of what the winds are doing. That's not what's happening in the Agulhas extension. So this inset here is when I've taken out that the sea level rise signal, and this is what's left, and so we get this red blue pattern in some places. We're getting significant trends of high and low along the axis. And so question is, what does that mean and why? And I don't necessarily have the answer. So this is a plot of the bathymetry around the Agulhas region. The main interesting things here, this is the Agulhas Plateau. It's very deep. It barely pops its head up above 3,000 meters, and yet the flow will always go up and over, almost always. I mean, if you paid attention to that video, it'll sometimes form an eddy here and stuff. But it generally speaking, the presence or the hypothesis is that the presence of this obstacle to the flow is what sets the downstream meander locations, and that's why they're always more or less in the same location. But as you get further downstream, it becomes more variable. And so the trend here, so we've basically taken our 30 years of altimetry, chopped it into two parts. If we take the average position for the first 15 years is the light grey, the second 15 years is the dark grey. And so the idea is that these first few meanders, which are T1, T2, T3, it stands for trough, just because we use a Northern Hemisphere convention here. So the ones that you might be tempted to call a peak, they're the troughs, and these are the peaks. So that the peaks and troughs for the first few ups and downs are getting bigger or more extreme. But if you look downstream of the Southwest Indian Ridge here, they're flattening out. So, your first guess would be something's happening, there's more energy up here and there's less energy down there. But it's not actually the case. Should I go here? Yeah. So that would be the case if you remember at the beginning, we're looking at the fact that the day-to-day pattern doesn't look anything like the mean. So the fact that we're getting flattening in the mean, it doesn't really mean that day-to-day is flattening. And so in reality, just to cut to the end, it's more that those meander peaks and troughs are moving around much more further downstream. They're not always found in the same place. So this plot I've spent a lot of time looking at on my screen, and Matthew Corkill called it a magic eye. And what it's a Hoffmöller plot, so with longitude probably on the wrong axis. So that's a long longitude, degrees west. So Africa's on this bit, and then this is time. And so what you see is what red means that our jet is found further north than normal. Blue means it's found further south than normal. And so what you see is if everything just, if they were standing in the sense, if our peaks and troughs didn't move, it would look like this bit here, right? So you get the red just goes along, it's just red, blue, nothing's moving anywhere. But what jumps out of the page is that you've got stuff going everywhere. You've got peaks moving westwards, peaks moving westwards, which you might expect, so they're Rossby waves, but you've also got peaks moving eastwards. And on top of everything, there's a lot of striations. You can see these striations across. And so these, if we zoom in, and now we've flipped it around, so it's makes a bit more sense, longitude, time. So we can see we've got these propagations of a trough that started off in one place. Over the course of the next year, it actually propagates towards the west, and the same thing, they can also propagate towards the east. But you've also got these fast ones, which is basically corresponds to perturbations in the flow. So a little kink in the flow propagating at the speed of the flow. So that propagates rapidly across. And so after a lot of investigation, we started to look at, can we describe this, given that this appears to be just waves moving around, can we describe it basically from linear wave theory? So what we did was use a tool called a linear inverse model, which is basically you get all the data, you calculate the covariance in the data. So what tends to happen before what? And you train this linear model to reproduce that, and then we can interrogate it as if we had the dynamical system. So we're basically creating an empirical dynamical system just out of the data. So it kind of, you think, well, it shouldn't work. It should be, this is a linear model, it should be very non-linear, but actually works quite well, which suggests that that a lot of what we're seeing here, a lot of this mess is actually just waves propagating left and right. But the interesting thing is, if we take our linear model, we can find out what perturbation can we add to the model that gives us the biggest response, right? It's called calculating optimal perturbation. It sounds complicated, but it's not really. And so this 4 panels down my left indicates what's called the optimal perturbation of the system. And so basically what we're seeing here is that this red and blue pattern that occurs at this place, if we perturb our meander like this, over the next few months, that actually propagates towards the east and ends up growing and producing a pattern that's not unlike the trend pattern that we see in the data. So the suggestion is that I think maybe I'll say something here. Yeah, so what we're actually seeing, these changes that we're seeing between upstream and downstream, it's a manifestation of the fact that we're making a change upstream, which I still can't explain. This change we're seeing upstream is what's driving those changes downstream in reality. It's just that the signal of increased peaks and troughs upstream produces a more variable peak location downstream. And we're able to describe that just with simple linear waves, as I said. We also looked at the other usual suspects. So what else, this was actually how it started. We looked at, okay, what could explain these changes? And so we looked at wind and density, basically. This is the wind plot. What's plotted here is Aiken convergence. So that's basically the gradient in the wind. For non-oceanographers, if you have, because the transport is perpendicular to the wind. If you have a gradient in the wind, you end up piling up water or having a deficit of water. And so this is just representing what the mean situation is. This is a zone where normally on the south side we'll have convergence, but there's a trend on the eastern side of our domain. This blue means that there's less. Over time, there's less convergence. And if you can just see the arrows here, this is actually the trend in the wind. So there's a trend, well, technically the trend in the wind stress. So there's like a anticyclonic trend just in this part of the ocean, which means that we get more upwelling basically in this part of the ocean. So it's kind of tempting to say, well, maybe that's the explanation. But it's not a really strong argument there. But when you do this analysis, there is actually, if you see these sort of red dots here, and here, which correspond closely to where we found trends in sea surface height. So there's actually evidence, this plot here, without going into detail, it's pretty strong evidence of the changes in the ocean driving changes in the atmosphere. So basically, because if you remember on the north side, we've got warm water, on the south side, we've got cold water. So if you move where that warm and cold water is, that drives the atmosphere. Either you're sending more heat to the atmosphere, or you're sucking more heat out of the atmosphere, which ends up giving you a trend in the wind. So part of this, so I've got this pattern in the wind. Part of it is the atmosphere driving the ocean, but the other part, which is basically this bit here, is the ocean driving the atmosphere due to the changes in the position of the front. This is changes in density. This is from a reanalysis that one assumes is, a best guess. It's, again, it's kind of interesting. We're seeing increase, we're just looking at the top 400 meters, we're seeing increased density. Increased density on this north side, which is actually due to cooling. So there's actually cooling occurring in this part of the Agulhas Extension region. I think that has been that's been documented. So it's nothing new, but again, is that the reason for the changes, or is it just coincidental? At least jury's out for me. And if we go, that was the top 400 meters. If we look below, it's quite a different pattern. Below that surface 400 meters, we're seeing there's actually a decrease in density, which is, you kind of expect that density is going to be decreasing everywhere because it's warming up. And that's the interesting thing. There in the surface, it's not the case. And we're seeing actually there's a salinity contribution in this part of the Indian to the density. So the density is increasing here, and that's actually due to increased salinity in that part, for which I have no explanation. That's it. So I'll leave you with this little worm.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very fascinating talk. Any questions? So it might be very hard to predict the future of the meander or extension, and I'm personally interested in its implication for the Southern Ocean system or ACC, or maybe.
That's exactly where I think that's the interesting thing in reality, is more than it's what this means for transport across the I'll just put these, I'll make these videos just now. So the interesting thing, so here this is should be a video, but it's not playing. There it goes. This is from the access model, the one on the left. That's salinity. So these changes in the meander, what are they meaning for the transport across the meander? Is it changing the rate at which we're transporting material across? And so you can see in this is a model, it's not reality, but this is what I was saying. So we're forming these eddies. This is like a fresh eddy here. These blue blobs, they're fresh eddies, but they'll travel west and they'll get reabsorbed. And so the fact that we're producing these eddies and they're going across to the other side doesn't necessarily mean that we've mixed that water. There hasn't necessarily been a transport of those properties. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'd like to go next with this, understand that process and see what are the implications of these changes we're seeing for transport between the Indian and the Southern Ocean.
Yes. Any questions? Sorry, it seems like the way to affect the how climate change affect the meander is not necessarily limited to wind, but also background temperature increase, or it's great, maybe a gradient.
Exactly, and that was hypothesis number one. So that was why we looked at this. I showed those plots of see if it goes back, of the densities. That was basically thinking that potentially if you have increased, so you see, for example, in this plot, we see there's one more. There's a density gradient across the jet. So if you change the density gradient, then you're altering the amount of available potential energy, and that could be giving you those changes. Which still could be, which I can't rule out, but and there's certainly patterns there. I just have not been able to come up with that smoking gun that links it, links those trends to links the trends of the changes in the jet to those that we're seeing in the density field. But yeah, I mean, definitely, it's not necessarily just the wind. It could be yeah, those changes in the density field. We also looked at interesting. There's no trend in the strength of the Agulhas, which was also the first thing you think of. Oh, the Agulhas is probably just going faster, and so that's why those first few meanders are getting bigger. But there is no trend in the strength actually.
Thank you. Any other questions? So
I might, sorry,
Yep.
Kai, just to jump in. Hi, Chris, it's Annie.
Hi.
I just following on what you just said, is there a trend in the leakage out of the Agulhas going westward? Is more or less heat getting transported across through that Agulhas leakage into the Atlantic, and how might that affect?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I haven't looked at all at the leakage. I kind of deliberately didn't go there.
Understandable.
But oh, wait a minute. I mean, if I think at the plots, let's see, so here, if there was, for example, if there was a trend in the geostrophic transport northwards, you would see it in the sea surface height trend. Yeah, don't know. But yes, that's a good point. How much like that partitioning? So even if there's the same amount going down, maybe more or less is heading west. Thanks, Annie.
Yeah, we let's talk about this offline sometime later.
Yeah,
I'd love
happy
to
to.
get more info. Thanks.
No, thanks for the question.
right, thank you, Chris, for this talk. That's really
No,
great.
thank you.
Thank you. Now we're finished. Thanks for joining today.